My mother gave my room to my divorced sister on a Sunday afternoon, with the lasagna still on the table and my aunt's fork halfway to her mouth. I had come downstairs because I heard my mother laughing in the tone she used when she wanted the room to believe she was being generous. My sister Vanessa was standing by the dining room arch in one of my sweaters, the oversized gray one I left draped on the back of my desk chair when I worked late. Two of her suitcases were already open in the hallway. My mother's hand was resting on the banister as if she were presenting a model home. "You can take the upstairs front room," she said to Vanessa, meaning mine. Then she looked straight at me and added, in the calm, practical voice that always made her cruelty sound like common sense, "Andrea, you'll need to clear your things out by tonight. Your sister needs stability. You're single. You can manage." The table went quiet in that ugly way family tables do when everyone understands something terrible has just happened and decides, almost together, to let it happen. My uncle lowered his eyes to his plate. My cousin pretended to check her phone. My aunt gave me the kind of look people give strangers in hospital waiting rooms when they do not want to get involved. Vanessa touched her hair and said softly, "Mom, she doesn't have to make a scene." Make a scene. As if I were the disruption. As if the suitcases in my hallway and the cardboard wardrobe box already set outside my bedroom were not evidence that the scene had started before I came downstairs. I stood there long enough to feel the heat gather in my throat, but not long enough to let it turn into begging. I looked at my mother, then at the staircase, then at the keys on the counter beside the fruit bowl. The keys to the house were on the ring my father had given me when he started chemo and could no longer carry groceries upstairs. The house key, the side gate key, the storage closet key, the little brass key to the old file cabinet in the study. "Tonight?" I asked. My mother folded her napkin with infuriating precision. "Vanessa cannot keep living out of her car and hopping between friends. She has a child to think about." Vanessa did not have her child that weekend. Lily was with her father. I insisted on every other week custody, the moment the divorce stopped being theoretical and started affecting his image. But my mother liked to place children in sentences as if they were moral shields. I said, "You could have spoken to me before moving her things into my room." "I am speaking to you now," my mother replied. "As the owner of this house." The lie was so cleanly delivered that if I had not known the paperwork myself, I might have flinched. A few people at the table glanced up then, sensing a sharper current underneath the family theater. My father had died 11 months earlier. Since then, my mother had been rewriting the story of everything he had built as if widowhood had granted her sole authorship. But I had spent the last 4 years of his life managing his hospital bills, restructuring his business accounts, paying the property tax from the consulting income I earned at night, and helping him formalize the trust he kept postponing because he hated paperwork and thought he would have more time. He had not had more time. I looked at the fruit bowl again, then at the file cabinet key, and said the only thing that could keep me from exploding in front of people who would later call me unstable. "Then let's make sure we are all talking about the same house." My mother smiled without warmth. Vanessa crossed her arms. My aunt shifted in her chair. And because nothing frightens entitled people more than calm, the room became even quieter. I did not argue. I went upstairs. I closed my bedroom door and stood in the center of the room. They had already started dismantling around me. My closet doors were open. 3 of my dresses had been pushed to one side to make space for Vanessa's blouses. My framed graduate certificate was face down on the dresser. The jade plant on my windowsill had been moved, carelessly, leaving a ring of damp soil on the wood my father had refinished with his own hands. On the bed sat 2 of Vanessa's cosmetic bags and a half-unzipped carry-on full of tangled chargers, scarves, and the dramatic debris of someone who wanted her suffering to be visible. This was not a rash decision made over lunch. This was preparation. I took my phone out and started taking pictures. The closet, the bed, the boxes, my certificate, my sweaters now mixed with hers, the wardrobe box outside the door with my name written on it in my mother's handwriting. Then I opened the top dresser drawer, where I kept passports, tax returns, the envelope of receipts from my father's final home care equipment, and the copy of the trust summary my lawyer had told me never to leave in the downstairs study. The envelope was gone. For one strange second, All I heard was the air conditioner turning on. Then every small oddness of the past month rearranged itself in my head. My mother insisting on organizing the study. Vanessa asking if I still kept important papers upstairs. The file cabinet in the study being locked when it was usually open. My mother snapping when I asked whether the quarterly tax mail had come. The certified letter from the county assessor arriving and disappearing before I could open it. I sat on the edge of the bed and forced myself to think in sequence. When people like my mother do something cruel in public, it is usually because they believe the private structure underneath it is already secure. Cruelty is confidence. Confidence comes from paperwork, or money, or a lie repeated enough times that weaker people are too tired to test it. I texted Noah, my father's old accountant, and then Claire Mercer, the estate attorney I had used to finalize the trust documents last year after my father's second hospitalization. I did not tell either of them the whole story. I wrote, "Need to confirm whether any property documents have been requested, changed, or copied in the last 30 days. Urgent. Please call when you can." Then I went to the study. The file cabinet was locked. That alone told me enough. My mother never locked anything unless she was afraid someone else might understand it. I used the brass key from the kitchen counter and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, the hanging folders had been rearranged. The trust folder was in the back, behind utilities and outdated insurance forms, the blue tab that used to say Hawthorne House. Trust was bent. When I pulled it out, the folder felt thinner, not empty, just thinned. Missing from it were the notarized letter of wishes, the property management authorization, and the page that designated me as successor co-trustee for the house, and attached operating account until the estate's final charitable distributions cleared. In their place sat a printed copy of the county website showing ownership history, with a yellow highlight over my mother's name as surviving spouse and a sticky note in Vanessa's looping handwriting. Good enough. Good enough for what? I photographed everything, including the sticky note. Then I opened the scanner app on my phone and captured each remaining page. My mother's voice floated down the hallway. She was telling someone that family had to pull together in hard seasons, that Andrea had always been independent, that Vanessa had nowhere else to go. Nowhere else to go. That, too, was a lie. Vanessa had received a generous settlement in the divorce, but she bled money theatrically. She liked leased cars, salon blowouts, networking dinners that were really excuses to avoid being home, and online shopping sprees she framed as rebuilding her confidence. 2 years earlier, when my father could no longer climb stairs, I had moved back into the house to help with his care. I turned my old room into an office and my evenings into unpaid labor. I took client calls at midnight. I learned medication schedules, insurance appeals, bed transfer mechanics, and how to make my mother feel assisted without ever admitting she needed assistance. Vanessa came by with flowers, expensive pastries, and 15-minute bursts of daughterly emotion whenever there were witnesses. My father knew the difference. He had never said it in a dramatic way. He had simply started asking me to attend meetings with him, to sit in on calls with Noah, to understand where the property taxes came from, how the trust operating account worked, which vendor still had the old key to the detached garage, and why the house, despite being mortgage-free, was never as simple as my mother liked to pretend. Utilities, insurance, repairs, annual taxes, deferred maintenance, the roof reserve, the lawsuit threat from the neighbor over the fence line my father had finally settled with a survey and an apology. Stability had always looked effortless to the people benefiting from it. I had been the one making it look that way. I heard footsteps and closed the cabinet just before Vanessa appeared in the doorway. "There you are," she said, leaning one shoulder against the frame, as if we were in a commercial for adult sisters who overcame their differences. "Mom's upset. You embarrassed her. You were in my room before I even sat down at the table." She gave a small shrug. "I needed to unpack. You needed me to walk into it already done." Her expression hardened for half a second before softening again. Vanessa's real personality always flashed by accident before she arranged her face. "Andrea, I just got divorced." "Yes. You know what that does to a woman." I looked at her and thought, not all women. Not women who tell the truth about money. Not women who do not spend months telling their mother they are entitled to somebody else's space because they made a mess of their own. What I said was, "Then you should have asked." She laughed, short and breathy. Asked? Mom said it was fine. This is her house. There it was again. Her house. Repetition as strategy. I wouldn't push that line too hard, I said. Something in my tone must have registered, because Vanessa straightened. What does that mean? It means unpack slowly. She stared at me, waiting for anger, and found none. People like Vanessa do not know what to do with a closed door. She called me cold when what she really meant was unavailable. Downstairs, dishes clinked. My family resumed the cowardly choreography of continuing lunch after a humiliation they would later describe as unfortunate. I returned to my room and, with deliberate calm, started packing not because I intended to leave, but because people reveal more when they think they have already won. By 4 o'clock, I had moved 2 suitcases and 3 archive boxes into the detached garage. Not valuables, not documents, just enough to make the displacement look real. My mother hovered twice, each time with the false gentleness of someone trying to monitor whether the victim had accepted the script. At 5, Noah called. "Andrea?" he said without preamble. "Did your mother ask me for anything?" "No. But someone called the office last week claiming to be following up on estate administration and asking whether the house was fully distributed. My assistant told them we don't discuss client matters by phone." "Why?" I told him, briefly. He exhaled through his nose. "The operating account is still under the trust. Your mother cannot lawfully reassign property control by announcing it over lunch." "I know. I need to know if any bank access changed." "It didn't on my end. But you should check whether someone requested statements. Also, Claire should know immediately." Claire texted 2 minutes later. "In court until 6. Reviewing your file after. Do not sign anything. Do not surrender keys. Do not leave voluntarily if they are attempting to establish exclusive occupancy. We need timeline plus photos." Exclusive occupancy. There it was. A real tactic under the melodrama. If my mother could present me as having moved out by choice, even informally, she could start reshaping practical control. Forward my mail. Move records. Change vendor contacts. Claim I no longer lived in the home, then argue that as widow and current resident she was merely making compassionate housing decisions for one daughter over another. It would not change the trust documents, but it could muddy the lived reality enough to be costly and exhausting to untangle. And exhaustion, more than truth, was always my mother's favorite weapon. That evening, Lily arrived. Vanessa had not mentioned that her ex was dropping their daughter off early. Lily was 9, solemn, observant, and far less manipulable than the adults around her believed. She wheeled her glitter-scratched suitcase into the hall, looked at the cardboard boxes by the garage door, then up at me. "Aunt Andy," she said quietly, "why are your books in the garage?" My mother answered before I could. "Just a little rearranging, sweetheart. Your mommy is staying here for a while." Lily looked from my mother to Vanessa to me. "In Andrea's room?" No one said yes. No one said no. Children notice silence better than adults do. At dinner, Lily pushed peas around her plate, while Vanessa narrated pieces of the divorce in the injured but dignified tone she used around new acquaintances. My mother supplied approving noises. My uncle had gone home. The house felt smaller. I sat across from Lily and watched her take in the shifted seating arrangement, the different water glass by my usual place, the suitcase still by the stairs, the fact that my mother spoke to me only when logistics required it. After dinner, Lily found me in the laundry room folding my father's old flannel shirts, the ones my mother had wanted to donate 3 times, and somehow never managed to when I was around. "Are you leaving?" she asked. I folded one sleeve over the other. "Not if I can help it." She nodded, as if that confirmed something she already suspected. Then she said, "Mom told Nana this was temporary. But Nana said once you're out, things get easier." For a second I forgot to breathe. "Lily," I said gently, "when did you hear that?" "This morning. In the car. Mom thought I had my headphones on. She watched me with those steady, dark eyes children get when they realize adults have been using them as scenery. Are you in trouble? No, I said. But thank you for telling me. She leaned against the dryer and whispered, I don't like when people act different when you're there. Neither did I. That was the first human scene that almost undid me, not because it was explosive, but because it was small. A child in a laundry room naming the atmosphere more honestly than four adults at a dining table. It reminded me of all the invisible work required to keep a family from becoming a performance. My mother had mistaken my restraint for passivity for so long that she no longer understood the difference. At 6:30, Claire called. I stood on the back patio while the sky dimmed over the maple tree my father had planted the year I turned 12. Andrea, I'm looking at the trust summary and the house schedule now, she said. Your mother has beneficial residency rights as surviving spouse, but the property itself remains in the Hawthorne Family Trust until the final trigger conditions are met. You are listed as successor administrative co-trustee for the house operations account and maintenance decisions if your father is deceased or incapacitated. That is active now, so she cannot just throw me out. Not lawfully, no. More importantly, she cannot represent sole control if trust administration is ongoing, and she definitely cannot remove records or imply ownership transfer. Do you have proof they were preparing to displace you? I have photos. Missing documents. A sticky note in Vanessa's handwriting. And Lily overheard them saying, once I'm out, things get easier. Claire was silent for a moment. That child does not need to become evidence. Keep her out of it if possible. But document the statement for your own timeline. Also, Andrea, I need to ask. Have you been contributing financially to the house? I laughed once without humor. Property tax. Insurance shortfall. Roof patch. Utility overruns. Dad's care supplies when the reimbursement lagged. I've got transfers and invoices. Good. That matters in context, even if not for title. Here's what I want you to do. Send me all photos tonight. Make a written chronology while it's fresh. Do not leave. If they escalate, I can send a preservation and non-interference letter tomorrow morning to your mother and any third party she has contacted. If someone has attempted to use county records selectively to create a false ownership narrative, we shut that down fast. I leaned against the railing and watched the kitchen window glow behind the curtains. She did this in front of family. Of course she did. Public humiliation is pressure. She is trying to get emotional compliance before legal reality catches up. That sentence steadied me, because that was exactly what it was. Emotional compliance. The weaponization of shame to produce practical surrender. I went back inside and spent the next 2 hours building a chronology. Dates. Conversations. Missing envelope. Certified county letter. Phone call to Noah. Photos timestamped. Lily's statement noted, but flagged as sensitive. My transfers to the household account over 27 months. The roof estimate I paid when my mother claimed cash was tight, while Vanessa posted a weekend spa photo from Palm Springs. The electric bill screenshots. The invoice for the stair rail I had installed after my father's fall. The email from the home hospice coordinator thanking me for managing scheduling because Mrs. Hawthorne seemed overwhelmed. The thank you card my father had dictated after surgery. To my steady girl, who remembers what everyone else forgets. Around 9, my mother knocked on my partly open bedroom door. She did not step in. That was her style when she wanted to maintain moral altitude. How long are you going to drag this out? She asked. I kept writing. I live here. Vanessa needs support. You mean Vanessa needs my room? My mother sighed. Andrea, you always make things so cold. It's not attractive in a woman. I set my pen down. There are insults that reveal more about the speaker than the target, and that was one of them. In my family, warmth meant compliance. Softness meant availability. A woman became cold the moment she stopped turning herself into unpaid infrastructure. This isn't about attractiveness, I said. It's about whether you had any right to do what you did. She crossed her arms. After all your sister has been through, I expected more compassion. Compassion would have been a conversation. This was an ambush. Her expression sharpened. Do not use that word in my house. Again, my house. I said, "You should stop saying that." For the first time, she looked uncertain. Not frightened. Not yet. Just slightly off balance, as if she sensed a missing stare in the dark. "Your father left things simple," she said. "No. He left them documented." She stared at me, then gave a brittle little smile. "If you want to get lawyers involved over a bedroom, that says a great deal about you. Then tomorrow will say a great deal about all of us." She left without replying. The next morning, I woke before dawn to the sound of drawers opening in the hallway. Vanessa was still moving things, impatient now that my failure to disappear had turned the performance inconvenient. I stayed in bed for a moment, listening to the house I had spent years holding together breathe around me. Pipes, floor creaks, the automatic coffee timer clicking on downstairs, my father's old radio in the garage faintly catching static because I had never unplugged it. It struck me then that houses remember labor even when families erase it. The polished stair rail, the fixed pantry shelf, the reorganized medicine cabinet, the winterized back spigot, the paperwork filed in sensible order, the taxes paid on time, the small systems that prevented daily life from descending into chaos. My mother thought ownership was the same as authorship. It never had been. At 8:15, Claire emailed a preservation letter addressed to my mother, with copied notice for any real estate agent, banker, or county office representative who might later claim misunderstanding. It was concise and devastating. It stated that the Hawthorne residence remained subject to trust administration, that I was an active administrative co-trustee for designated house operations, that no unilateral exclusion, removal of records, reassignment of access, or misrepresentation of title or occupancy should occur, that all physical and electronic records relevant to the trust and property be preserved immediately, and that any attempt to interfere with my access or destroy documents would be considered evidence of bad faith. I printed 3 copies, one for my mother, one for the study file, one for myself. My mother was in the kitchen making coffee when I set the envelope beside her mug. She looked at the law firm's letterhead and went very still. "What is this?" she asked. "A reminder," I said, "that the house is not a stage prop." Vanessa came in halfway through, barefoot, wearing my robe now. My robe. She read only enough to catch the words trust administration and non-interference before her face changed. "Oh my God," she said. "You actually got a lawyer involved, over a room." My mother unfolded the pages and read to the end. Her mouth tightened. "This is obscene," she said. "You've made the family look ridiculous. The family did that yesterday." She slapped the pages down on the counter. "Your father would be ashamed. That one landed because it was meant to." My mother reserved my father's memory for moments when she needed a larger weapon than her own disappointment. But grief loses some of its power to control you when you have already sat through morphine schedules and watched a man you loved forget words, and still use the last clear ones to warn you where the weak beams were. "My father is the reason the trust is documented," I said. "Do not use him to cover your choices." Vanessa scoffed. "This isn't about legal anything. You're jealous because I need help, and for once it isn't about you." It was almost impressive, the speed with which she could turn dependency into accusation. I said nothing. Silence is expensive when you know how to use it. Around noon, my mother's friend Patricia arrived with 2 casseroles and the appetite of a woman who loved to stand near family disasters and call it support. By 1 o'clock, my aunt had returned. By 2, Vanessa's version of events had spread through the extended family chat. Not in overtly slanderous language, but in that poisonous soft-focus style that makes the target look heartless rather than wronged. "Andrea is having a difficult time accepting that Vanessa and Lily need temporary space. We are praying she finds peace and perspective." Temporary. Peace. Perspective. The vocabulary of respectable cruelty. By 3, 3 cousins had texted me variants of, "Please don't make this harder than it has to be." That was when I understood the next layer. My mother was escalating socially because the legal ground felt less secure. If she could win the moral narrative first, then any formal action I took later would look disproportionate. Not a defensive structure, but an attack on family. I forwarded the group messages to Claire. She replied, "Good. Pattern of coordinated pressure. Then she asked the question that opened the next door. Have you checked the house operating account statements recently? I had not. Not because I was careless, but because after my father's death I had been so busy closing vendor issues, settling small liabilities, and keeping my own consulting work afloat, that I only checked balances when I needed to pay bills. The account had enough float. Or so I thought. I logged in from my laptop at the desk in my half-invaded room. There were 6 recent withdrawals I did not recognize. Not huge enough to trigger panic individually. Large enough to matter together. 2 payments to a family law firm. 1 to a furniture rental company. 1 to a moving and storage service. 2 cashier's checks marked simply as reimbursement. My pulse slowed in that dangerous way it does when anger becomes clarity. The family law firm was not mine. The furniture rental company explained the polished neutral decor. Vanessa had suddenly been posting in photos from her reset era, even before the divorce was final. And the moving service date was 10 days before the Sunday lunch. 10 days. Which meant the plan to install her in my room had existed well before any tearful appeal for temporary help. They had used the Trust House Operations account. The account meant for taxes, maintenance, and estate-related property costs, to subsidize Vanessa's transition and the legal strategy around it. I downloaded every statement. Then I checked historical transfers. My own monthly contributions were there, neat and humiliating in their consistency. $1,200 for tax reserve, $800 for utilities during the summer spike, $2,900 for emergency roof work, $640 for plumbing. My money had been cushioning the house while my mother called me cold and Vanessa called me jealous. And now that same account had funded the machinery of my displacement. This was no longer about a room. It was about misuse, about extraction, about the slow, genteel theft that only works when the person holding things up is too busy surviving to audit the floorboards. I sent everything to Claire and Noah. Noah called first this time. Andrea, he said. And there was a new sharpness in his voice. Those withdrawals should not have happened without trustee purpose. Furniture rental? Family law? Absolutely not from that account. Can they claim reimbursement for household transition? For Vanessa's divorce? Not credibly. Not if the funds are tied to the Trust House Operations account. Who authorized them? I stared at the screen. The digital approvals were coded under my mother's user profile. But one of the reimbursements had memo language that sounded like Vanessa's phrasing. Fresh start expenses. My father would have laughed bitterly at that. Fresh starts are rarely funded by the people demanding them. Send me everything, Noah said. I want a spreadsheet before they have time to reframe this. On Wednesday afternoon, another piece surfaced by accident. The mail carrier left a bundle on the entry table while my mother was out, and Vanessa was upstairs taking a call on the back porch. Mixed in with catalogs and a church bulletin was a white window envelope from a document service company I recognized from the estate process. Not a law firm. One of those third-party runners people use when they want certified copies quickly, and without asking too many direct questions in person. The envelope had already been opened, but the folded slip inside remained. Request completed. Certified copy. Death certificate. Trust abstract reference. Property. Related supporting record inquiry. Pickup authorized by alternate contact. Alternate contact. Not widow. Not executor. Not attorney. Alternate contact. I photographed the slip, then checked the back where the receiving signature had bled faintly through the paper. The first name was too smudged to read clearly, but the last initial was V. That mattered because it showed intent beyond household rearrangement. Somebody had been collecting pieces of official-looking paper, not to clarify truth, but to manufacture confidence. That is what manipulative families do when they want power without process. They gather fragments and present them like a whole. I added the slip to my file. Later that same day, my mother called from the downstairs hall while I was on a client Zoom. I muted myself and stepped out just long enough to hear her say, "The locksmith is coming tomorrow. Make sure the side gate is clear." The side gate. My hand tightened around the phone. Why is a locksmith coming? She barely turned. The lock sticks. It has stuck for 3 years. Then it is time to fix it. When were you going to mention changing access points after serving me a letter about preserving the status quo? She looked annoyed at being caught on a detail she had classified as domestic rather than legal. Do not turn every maintenance issue into a conspiracy. I will if the maintenance issue is access. The locksmith never came. Either she canceled after realizing I would document it, or the point had simply been to make me feel the edges closing in. With my mother, practical threats and psychological threats often traveled together. She liked locks, seating charts, key bowls, and room assignments because they let her convert hierarchy into furniture. That night, I walked through the house room by room, after everyone was asleep. Kitchen, hall bath, study, dining room, back patio door, garage entry. Not because I was frightened she would physically remove me in the dark, though the thought had crossed my mind, but because I needed to feel the dimensions of the place without their voices inside it. The house at night felt like evidence. The repaired hinge in the linen closet. The extra light bulbs I had labeled after my father started forgetting what wattage went where. The envelope of appliance warranties I had organized. The contractor cards rubber-banded by season. People like my mother call this fussing. Men like my father, when they are honest, call it civilization. I stood in the den where his recliner used to be before hospice equipment took over that corner. For months after he died, I kept hearing phantom sounds in the house. The oxygen machine, the late-night cough, the wheels of the overbed table. Grief had made me porous. Perhaps that was why my mother's move had enraged me less as a sibling's slight than as desecration. They had not simply chosen Vanessa over me. They had chosen convenience over stewardship in the one place where stewardship had cost real flesh. That is the thing broad audiences understand immediately, even if they do not use the same words. A room is never just a room when you were the one who stayed. A key is never just a key when your labor has already been built into the walls. That evening, the second grounding scene arrived quietly. Lily was doing homework at the breakfast nook while Vanessa was upstairs on the phone, crying loudly enough for the whole house to hear. My mother had gone to church even though it was not her usual night. The house was temporarily honest. Lily looked up from a math worksheet and asked, "Did Grandpa really want everyone to share?" Children ask about fairness in the language they have available. I made her a grilled cheese, cut diagonally the way my father used to, and sat across from her with tea gone lukewarm in my hands. "Grandpa wanted everyone safe," I said. "That is not the same as letting people take whatever they want." She thought about that. "Mom says you act like a lawyer." I smiled despite myself. "No, I act like someone who reads things before signing them." She nodded again, almost solemnly. "That seems smarter." It was a tiny scene. No shouting, no reveal. Just a child eating grilled cheese and choosing, without ceremony. Which adult in the room made her feel steadier? That mattered more than any family group chat. The next morning, Claire requested an in-person meeting at her office and Malcolm me to bring original records, device screenshots, and a written list of who had witnessed the Sunday lunch. I packed a banker box and drove there before anyone in the house was fully awake. Claire was the kind of attorney my mother never understood until too late. Not theatrical, not loud, not interested in emotional speeches. She read quickly, spoke precisely, and had the unnerving gift of making disorder line itself up. She went through my chronology, the photos, the account statements, and the missing document list with a yellow pencil. "All right," she said finally. "Here's what they did wrong. Public humiliation is ugly, but not unlawful. Misrepresenting house control, while trust administration remains active, is a problem. Removing or thinning records is a bigger problem. Using the house operations account for personal divorce-related and move-related expenses is a measurable problem. Coordinating pressure to induce you to leave strengthens the bad faith picture. And if they have represented this as your voluntary exit anywhere in writing, we can use that." I thought of the family chat. "The phrases temporary space and peace and perspective," Claire continued. "We are not going to fight them in the kitchen. We are going to create a clean record. Today I want formal account freezes on discretionary non-maintenance expenditures. Pending review. Written demand for missing documents. And notice of a family trust meeting this Friday at Noah's office. Neutral ground. Witnesses. Paper. If your mother refuses, that also helps us. She won't refuse, I said. She'll think showing up lets her perform innocence. Claire's mouth tilted. Then let her perform. By noon, the notices had gone out. My mother called me 3 times. I did not answer. She then sent a text designed to look reasonable in front of a future judge, therapist, pastor, or gossiping cousin. I don't understand why you're making this formal. We can talk at home with love. I replied only. Friday at 10 a.m. works for me. The hours after that were ugly in a familiar way. My mother stopped speaking softly and started speaking strategically within earshot. Some people confuse control with responsibility. When a woman doesn't build her own family, she gets possessive of the old one. Vanessa has suffered enough without being punished for needing her mother. Punished. Needed. Mother. Every sentence was a moral costume. Vanessa escalated too. She started referring to my room as the room as though no one had ever belonged in it. She moved my books from one shelf to another and said she was trying to make things less personal. She asked whether I really thought Dad would want legal fees wasted on sibling hostility. She cried on speakerphone to friends about how hard it was to rebuild with a sister who could not let go. I kept logging everything. Thursday night, I found the missing envelope. Not the whole thing, just part of it. A corner torn off and shoved behind the printer tray in the study, where it must have slipped when someone removed the contents in a hurry. My handwriting was on the front. Trust summary plus medical receipts. Inside the shred bin beside the desk were strips of paper too narrow to reconstruct fully, but wide enough to show fragments. Administrative co-trustee, property maintenance authority, operating account, preserve all records. They had tried to destroy the pages they did not like and keep only the county printout they thought sounded more flattering. I photographed the shred bin from 6 angles. Friday morning, the trust meeting began at 10:07. Because my mother wanted the added drama of arriving late. She entered Noah's conference room in a cream blazer that said bereaved matriarch with excellent posture. Vanessa came in behind her carrying a leather tote and an expression of injured dignity. Patricia, somehow, had attempted to come too. But Claire had met her in the lobby and sent her away before the room could turn into a prayer circle. Noah was already seated with spreadsheets. Claire had the trust binder open. I sat opposite my mother with my own copies lined up in tabs. For the first time all week, I could feel the architecture of the room working in my favor. Fluorescent lights. Glass wall. Water pitcher. No family photographs. No casserole dishes. No sentimental shortcuts. My mother smiled thinly. This seems excessive. Claire answered before I could. This seems documented. Vanessa bristled. We're talking about a temporary room arrangement. Noah slid a statement across the table. No. We're talking about withdrawals from a trust house operations account for personal expenditures unrelated to maintenance or administration. Vanessa glanced at the page, then at my mother. My mother did not look back. That told me more than any confession would have. Claire proceeded in a tone so calm it made every fact sound heavier. Active trust administration. Successor co-trustee authority. Preservation obligations. Missing records. Misuse concerns. Potential exposure if false representations had been made to third parties or if a beneficiary had been pressured to vacate in order to facilitate improper control. My mother tried 3 strategies in under 7 minutes. First, sentimental widowhood. Then maternal sacrifice. Then confusion. I may have misunderstood what account certain expenses should come from, Noah said. There are memo lines reading fresh start expenses and legal reimbursement. Vanessa flushed. Those were loans. From a trust operations account? Claire asked. Silence. My mother then pivoted to attack. Andrea has always resented Vanessa. She acts helpful, but she likes leverage. That was almost the line that would have worked on a different audience. In my family, competence had always been translated into control when displayed by a woman. But Noah had known my father for 30 years. Claire had my records in front of her. The room was not built for myth. I opened my folder and slid over the transfer log of my contributions to the house over 27 months. Property taxes, insurance gap coverage, repair invoices, care-related reimbursements never repaid. I added the hospice emails, the roof patch receipt, the stair rail invoice, the electric spikes, the dates Vanessa had received financial support from my mother during the same period. My father's dictated thank you note. Noah looked at the page, then at my mother, and something in his face changed from professional courtesy to weary recognition. Edward told me Andrea was the one keeping this place operational, he said quietly. My mother went pale in a way that had nothing to do with age, and everything to do with having the wrong man speak the truth aloud. Claire then placed the Sunday lunch photographs on the table. My room pre-cleared. Vanessa's belongings installed. My certificate turned face down. The wardrobe box marked with my name. The sticky note. Good enough. This does not look temporary, she said. Vanessa snapped. I was unpacking because my mother said it was fine. There it was. The first real crack. Not a denial. An explanation that admitted the act and redirected blame. Claire leaned back. Mrs. Hawthorne, did you authorize your daughter to occupy Andrea's room and remove or reorganize Andrea's property before any discussion with Andrea? My mother hesitated. In family rooms, hesitation can be edited by tears. In conference rooms, it is just hesitation. I did what I thought was compassionate. Compassionate to whom? I asked. And it was the first thing I had said in several minutes. My mother looked at me as if I had betrayed some unspoken agreement never to ask the obvious question in a formal voice. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. But the real collapse happened in the next 10. Noah recommended immediate reimbursement of the misused account funds, suspension of my mother's discretionary access pending review, and a written acknowledgement that occupancy and property control representations had been made inaccurately. Claire demanded recovery or accounting for the missing documents, and warned that destroyed trust-related records could trigger further action. Vanessa started crying. But badly this time. Not with her usual luminous fragility. She cried like someone who had expected family emotion to cancel arithmetic. My mother refused the word misuse. Claire said then we could use unauthorized personal expenditures. Noah said the bank would not enjoy the distinction. Vanessa said this was humiliating. And that was the moment I almost laughed, because humiliation had apparently only become visible to them once it sat under fluorescent lights with statements attached. By the time we stood, my mother's narrative had broken in front of the only witnesses who mattered. Not cousins, not casseroles, not the churchwomen who liked moral fog. The accountant, the attorney, the record. But collapse, I learned, is rarely a single moment. It is a domino pattern. The first domino was financial. By Monday, the trust operations account had tighter controls. Vanessa had to return the furniture rental under early termination penalties because the next month's payment would not come from house money. The cashier's check trail led to a legal retainer she could no longer maintain. Her reset apartment turned out to have been more staging than lease, more Instagram than solvency. Her ex's attorney, notified because some divorce-related expenses had been mischaracterized, took sudden interest in her disclosure habits. The second domino was social. Noah, who had always been discreet, was also old enough to believe that silence should not shelter repeat bad faith. He did not gossip, but he did answer direct questions honestly when other trustees and affiliated advisors asked why a routine review had become urgent. Patricia stopped coming by so often once there was paperwork instead of pathos. My aunt, sensing the wind shift, called to say she had felt uncomfortable at Sunday lunch. I did not rescue her with absolution. Cousins who had texted me to be peaceful suddenly texted that they had not understood the full picture, which was true in one sense and false in another. People often understand enough. They simply prefer the version that costs them nothing. The third domino was emotional, and it came through Lily. Children do not care about legal language, but they feel rearranged loyalties with painful precision. After the Friday meeting, Vanessa came home brittle and furious. She snapped at Lily for leaving a backpack by the stairs. She fought with my mother behind the kitchen door in a hissed, vicious whisper that carried anyway. She said things like, "You told me this would be simple," and "She has always done this. She makes everything about paper." Lily heard enough to become even quieter. On Tuesday night, she came to my room. Still my room. Because Vanessa's occupation had become suddenly provisional, and handed me a folded drawing. It showed the house with 3 windows lit and one dark figure outside with a suitcase. Above it, in careful block letters, she had written, "This wasn't fair the first day either." I thanked her and put the drawing in my desk drawer beside my father's note. That same night, my mother tried one final escalation. She invited Pastor Dale over without telling me. He was a kind man in the general sense, and a dangerously useful one in families like mine, because he believed reconciliation was a virtue, even when justice had not yet been named. My mother seated him in the living room as if he were neutral furniture, and began explaining that there had been unfortunate misunderstandings between sisters after Vanessa's divorce. She used grief, womanhood, and Christian mercy like decorative pillows. Pastor Dale turned to me and asked whether there might be room for grace. There are moments when a woman either re-enters the old script or leaves it forever. I brought him the trust reimbursement letter, the account summary, and the photo of the sticky note. I said very calmly, "Grace is not the same as agreeing to be displaced with my own money." He read enough to become deeply uncomfortable, which is often the first honest thing a polite man does in the presence of female exploitation. My mother tried to redirect toward healing. Pastor Dale cleared his throat and said perhaps what the family needed first was accountability and a respect for proper stewardship. My mother did not invite him again. The house changed after that. Not dramatically, but in all the practical ways that matter. Vanessa stopped wearing my clothes. My mother stopped saying my house, at least in my hearing. The side table in the hall where the key bowl sat became curiously untouched, as if everyone had realized keys were symbols now. The casserole circuit dried up. The group chat moved on to another cousin's engagement because families prefer fresh stories once the old one starts making the wrong people look guilty. A week later, the reimbursement check arrived for the misused trust account funds. Not from my mother, but from a new personal line of credit Vanessa had opened under bad terms. That was fitting. Entitlement often becomes very expensive when it finally has to fund itself. Claire also recovered, through pressure rather than miracle, the missing trust pages. Not the originals. My mother claimed she did not know where those went, but scanned copies appeared in an email from an old office address Vanessa had access to, which told its own story. We preserved everything. Then came the last public scene, the one neither of them expected. My mother had planned a small memorial lunch for my father's birthday, the first since his death. She did not cancel it after the trust meeting, because cancellation would have looked like retreat. So relatives came. Family friends came. Noah came. Because my father had once asked him, jokingly, to make sure nobody told lies about him after he was gone. Claire did not come, but her restraint was present in every visible line of the afternoon. The mood was stiff, overly polished. My mother gave a short speech about Edward's devotion to family, home, and keeping people together. Vanessa stood beside her in a pale dress with one hand on Lily's shoulder, like a tableau of restored daughterhood. Then Noah, who had been invited as an old friend and not expected to speak, raised his glass. He said, "Edward loved many things, but one of the clearest was this. He respected the people who carried weight without applause." The room went still. He turned, not dramatically, just enough, and looked at me. When the accounts, repairs, care schedules, and property issues became complicated, Andrea was the one who learned them, managed them, and kept this house running. Edward knew that. He said so often. My mother's face changed by degrees. Not a collapse into sobbing. Something worse. The visible failure of a narrative she had curated too confidently. Noah continued, gentle as a knife. He also believed documentation was a form of love. It protects the vulnerable from whoever is loudest after the funeral. No one moved. My aunt stared into her wine. One cousin actually closed his eyes. Lily looked at me and smiled, just once, as if something had clicked into place. That was the public collapse. finally complete. Not because anyone shouted. Not because I exposed private ugliness with theatrical relish. But because the truth was spoken in the language my father trusted. Labor. Records. Stewardship. Protection. My mother had tried to turn me into the selfish daughter, standing in the way of compassion. Instead, in front of witnesses, the hierarchy reversed. She became what she had feared all along. The person who had humiliated the one daughter the house had quietly depended on. After most guests left, my mother found me in the study. The late sun was hitting the file cabinet, and for a second I thought absurdly of all the times I had knelt there sorting invoices while she told people I was so good with details. Praise can be another way of hiding extraction, she said without looking at me. You enjoyed that? No, I said. I endured it. She flinched, very slightly. For years I had wanted a scene in which she understood me all at once. Her favoritism, her revisionism, the way she dressed exploitation in maternal language, and called it necessity. But clarity rarely arrives as confession. More often it arrives as diminished options. She sat in my father's old chair. You made me look cruel. I thought of Sunday lunch. My certificate turned face down. Lily asking why my books were in the garage. The trust account paying for Vanessa's fresh start while I covered the roof. The group texts urging peace from people who never carried anything heavy. You did not need my help with that, I said. She did not cry. That was one thing I can say for her. She was too proud to perform weakness. When there was no audience left to reward it, Vanessa moved out 3 weeks later. Not to a dream apartment, not to an elegant fresh start, to a modest rental 40 minutes away, with older cabinets and a parking spot so tight she complained about it to everyone. She sold the leased SUV and bought something practical. She and my mother remained entangled, but the glamour had gone out of the arrangement once the subsidy stopped. Lily still came by some weekends. She preferred the quiet of my room to the staged brightness her mother kept trying to manufacture elsewhere. As for the house, it did not become warm again overnight. Houses are not healed by legal clarity alone. There were silences, separate grocery shelves for a while, a brutal honesty about bills, fewer family lunches, more mail addressed correctly. The practical truth reasserted itself in increments. I resumed handling the tax calendar and maintenance schedule, but this time with formal records, written approvals, and no pretending that invisible labor is more noble when it is unprotected. The third grounding scene came in winter. Snow had not yet started, but the air had sharpened. I was in the kitchen at 6 in the morning making coffee before a client call when my mother came in wearing my father's old navy cardigan. She opened the pantry, looked at the labeled bins I had reorganized after Thanksgiving, then at the wall calendar where the property insurance review date was circled in blue. For a moment she seemed smaller. Not in body, but in certainty. You always did remember the deadlines, she said. It was not an apology. My mother was not built for clean apologies. But it was the closest thing she knew to admitting that foundations exist only because someone keeps checking where the cracks might begin. I poured my coffee and said nothing. By then I no longer needed the speech. That was the quiet aftermath in the end. Not triumph. Not revenge. Not me standing in the center of a living room making declarations about self-respect while violins swelled in the background. Just this. I stayed. The records held. The money was returned. The false story broke in front of witnesses. The child saw enough truth to stop doubting her own instincts. And the woman they had tried to displace became impossible to misdescribe. My mother had given my room to my divorced sister because she believed I was the easiest person to move. The least dramatic. The least married. The most practiced at absorbing inconvenience and calling it love. She thought quiet meant weak, that usefulness could be pushed to the margin because it would continue serving from there. She was wrong. I was never the extra daughter in that house. I was the one who knew where everything was buried, what everything cost, when everything was due, and how quickly a family myth collapses once the structure underneath it starts speaking. By spring, the maple tree outside the patio had new leaves. The jade plant survived the move and put out 2 fresh stems. My certificate was back on the dresser, upright this time. In the study, the file cabinet tabs were rewritten in my hand, cleaner and harder to misplace. Lily's drawing stayed in the top drawer. So did my father's note. To my steady girl who remembers what everyone else forgets. In the end, that was the whole story. They had humiliated the one person they depended on to keep the house, the money, the records, and the dignity of the place intact. They tried to turn me into a suitcase in the hallway. Instead, the paperwork answered for me. And once the structure spoke, I did not have to.